I'm sure by now that you've definitely heard of the upsides of working in tech, but what about the downsides? Whether you're sitting on the fence, uncertain about tech, or just generally interested in learning more about tech culture, here are some things that I've highlighted that may be some downsides for you. Hi, I'm Laura, a PM working in tech, and on my channel I cover my life working as a PM, my life working in tech, and other computer science related advice. Things will look dramatically different across each company, and it's hard to just generalize everything into one video, so I just want to put out the disclaimer that this is my personal opinion, some experiences that I've had in the past, and also what I've heard from other people, but may not be prescriptive of what your career or situation looks like. The first point that I really want to capture is that you will probably get encapsulated into tech culture really quickly. And if not you personally, then it feels like at least everyone else around you has been in the thralls of tech culture. Well, when you find yourself in a tech hub city like the Bay Area or in Seattle, it's pretty likely that most of the people around you that you'll be interacting with are also going to be working in tech. Your first line of socialization is probably going to be other people in tech, especially your coworkers that may be a little bit more similar and closer in age to you. By nature of personal experience, I've seen that people in tech mainly befriend other people in tech because it's easy. You have similar interests, you have similar jobs, and there are a lot of overlapping things that you can talk about. There's also a lot of depth to each conversation that you do have because you have a lot of shared and similar experiences. This certainly isn't bad, but sometimes you just want a different perspective or a different outlook on life or a different outlook on a particular question. Again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. So then how do you expand your social circle? Honestly, still figuring that out on myself, so it's not like I have any bright ideas or solutions here. It definitely feels harder to meet people outside of tech just given where I live and the prevalence of people working in tech here. So I've talked a lot about the social aspect of what it means to be a part of tech culture, but what else is out there? That doesn't sound awful. This leads me to my next point where there's always a high level of competition and comparing what success means to getting a job at top companies. Everyone wants to vie for the top paying companies or the top startups and be the next innovator or be the next great engineer, PM, or designer. Especially as you start to get into your first internship or first full-time job hunt, you really get overwhelmed with the fact that if you don't get a job at a good tech company, then you've basically failed at this point. And it also doesn't help that when you're looking for PM roles, you're practically only going to find entry-level PM roles at those big jobs or at those bigger startups that have the capacity to take on more PMs. There are tons and tons of software engineering roles at smaller and mid-sized companies that also a lot of people find fulfillment and satisfaction in. Also, success comes in a lot of different ways, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're making the most money out of all of your peers or that you do have that job at a Fortune 500 or startup. Since everyone is applying for those Fortune 500s though, that's why it can feel so impossible to just get that first job. When it comes to interviews for these companies though, you're probably also going to be faced with leak code and algorithm style questions, and if that's not really your cup of tea, then maybe you'll also find some more benefits in going into a smaller or mid-sized company instead. The third point is that everyone is going to have a slightly different definition of work-life balance, and it's really up to you to protect your balance and figure out what's right for you. No one out there is going to help you spell out work-life balance for yourself, and it's also going to be really hard for them to do so. You may get jealous of the person on CS Career Questions who says they only work 2 to 4 hours a day and spend the other half doing whatever they want. You may also feel a huge sense of relief that you're not that engineer at a big tech company and having to work 60 hours a week regularly and 80 hours a week in a crunch week. Or you also may not feel like you're using your time effectively enough compared to the people out there that are working 2 full-time remote software engineering jobs. Or maybe you're working on a team that has on-call rotations and you feel like you have to be glued to your laptop 24/7 for a week, and your friends are happily on teams without any on-call rotations at all. The bottom line though is that there's no definition of work-life balance when it comes to tech companies, and every team, organization, and company is going to be vastly different from each other. There may be some seasonality to it, but in the end, there's really no defined schedule or routine that you can fall back on to say that this is exactly how work-life balance looks like. You can contrast this to accounting, for example, where 9 months of the year you work pretty regularly, and then for 1/4 of the year you're pretty overworked and there's tons and tons of things to do and get done. The biggest piece of advice that I can give here in respect to work-life balance is to make sure you protect your own time and figure out what works for you. Generally, you should be working 40 hours a week as expected, unless there are some special asterisks or some horrible outage where you have to be on call and helping out. However, if you do feel insanely overworked or burnt out, then just try to take care of yourself. Talk to your manager and have conversations about prioritizations and see if they can help you out and lift anything off of your plate for a couple of weeks. Again, sometimes things happen and you just have to take care of them and there's going to be a lot going on, but if this is something consistent, you're probably not going to have a good time and you're going to feel stressed, irritable, frustrated, and overall just incredibly burnt out at the end of it all. Fourth, and I think the most important point that I want to hammer in for new grads, is that the team that you get placed on for your first role is going to have a huge influence on if you feel seen, heard, and like you belong in the tech industry. Depending on where you work, it can feel incredibly isolating and lonely, especially if you are starting out remote. Speaking from experience and also drawing upon my previous point, Team culture can have a huge impact on how burnt out you feel and how productive and motivated you feel on a day-to-day basis. Especially if this is your first full-time job, I cannot overstate how important team culture is, and to make sure that you find a place that you feel comfortable and that you feel like you can comfortably speak up in. I had a really difficult time in my first role just due to some culture disconnect, and I didn't really feel like it was the right place for me. It also brought along a series of questions that made me doubt whether tech was the right thing for me and if I should really continue pursuing this at all. After all, if I couldn't hang even in my very first role, then how can I expect to progress in a career for the next 20 or 30 years? The good thing about working in tech though, as a kind of a counterpoint, is that there are lots and lots of other opportunities, teams, and products out there for you to work on. If you know in your heart that one team just really isn't the right fit for you, then see if you can make a change. A lot of companies offer internal transfers that make it really easy to try out something new if the current thing just isn't working for you, and that's also the avenue that I decided to take. I encourage you to give it another shot before calling it quits or switching out into a different career path entirely. I think it's really important to know how to advocate for yourself, how you feel, and what your needs are, and if those needs aren't being met, then figure out what else you can do. If you are looking for a new role opportunity though, a good way to kind of make sure that it is what you're looking for is to ask questions relevant to the experiences you've had before that negatively impacted you. For example, in your previous role, you felt really lost and just uncertain about what the company's strategy was, then ask this new manager or whoever is interviewing you what that strategy looks like and see if they can articulate that to you. If they can, then that's probably a good sign of a lot more transparency and solves one of the concerns you had on your previous team. In the end, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is to make sure that you know how to advocate for yourself. There's some aspect of self-advocation that I think covers all 4 points that I mentioned, and it's just a really helpful skill to keep in mind and build as you move on and progress into your career. It's definitely a hard skill and something that I'm still working on, but I really hope that this gave you a little bit more insight onto what you can expect moving into tech. If you have any further questions, feel free to schedule a coffee chat with me at ak.ms/chatwithlaura or join the conversation at my Discord channel, which I'll link in the description box down below. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again next week for a brand new video. Bye.